It's Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerantz. We thank you for joining us. Our guest is Curren Price. Mr. Price is a member of the California State Senate, and sir, we thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Recently, the governor held his last State of the State address, and he came out with a very controversial proposal, and that was that changed the funding formula as it relates to prisons and higher education. Right now, the state spends more on prisons than higher ed. He wants a constitutional amendment to flip that. What's your take?
Well, I certainly support that. I think it's a real travesty, in fact, that we are spending more on maintaining someone in prison than providing education for our youth and adults. I think that's the kind of infrastructure we should be supporting, our education. And so I was pleased that he also said there'd be no cuts in education. We know that there's going to be another round of budget cuts. It's about a $26 billion deficit that we're facing over the next year or so.
Sir, last year, or in the last 18 months, I should say, the state legislature had to close a $60 billion deficit when you add it all up.
Right.
Where are you going to cut?
I don't know. It's a very good question, and it's something we're going to have to grapple with.
And you talk about prisons. I mean, right now there's a federal court receiver who is demanding that the state spend $8 billion to reform the healthcare system. They're demanding that prisoners be released. Maybe that's a good thing budgetarily.
Right.
I mean, forget the issues in terms of crime and safety.
Well, they are all intractable problems, and you're right. It's going to take some real dedication and commitment, some bipartisan support on both sides.
Well,
and there are going to have to be some cuts, and there are going to have to be some taxes. We're going to have to find new sources of revenue.
Well, let's talk about bipartisan support, because I think it's fair to say that if you look at the Republican caucus as it stands in the state of California, the chance that you'll get votes to increase a tax, a fee, whatever you want to call it, is pretty much zero. And you need 2/3 to get that. So what are you going to do?
Well, I don't know. We're going to have to grapple with that. As you know, the governor is also supporting a constitutional amendment to change that requirement, that 2/3 requirement, and I think that's long overdue.
Well,
I think that that's going to be helpful, but it doesn't help us right now.
Right. Okay. So you mentioned this 2/3 requirement to get a budget passed, to get taxes passed. Only one of 3 states that allow that.
Correct.
Arkansas and I think Rhode Island is the other one. But how do you convince the voters that will see the supermajority requirement, at least on the tax issue, as beneficial to them?
Well, you're right. They're going to have to be convinced, and it's going to have to be a bipartisan measure and a message, and it's going to be, I agree, difficult getting those on the Republican side to go along with that. They've already indicated some resistance. They feel that that's their only saving chance, is to be able to block that. But we've got to think about the greater good, and hopefully we can build enough support by providing enough information and education to the populace about what the real implications of this 2/3 vote have been, not just currently, but in the past.
But at the same time, there's also an initiative that it seems to have qualified that would go way beyond just the 2/3 initiative as it relates to the budget and taxes. It's calling for a California Constitutional Convention. I believe it's qualified. And so if that happens, all bets are off.
All bets are off. It could be a runaway train. It could be very limited, or it could be wide-ranging.
What do you think about a California Constitutional Convention?
I prefer doing it a different way. I don't know if a convention is going to...
Could be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Well, 1789 all over again.
But it could be a lot of trouble. And while I don't have any doubts that the public knows what it wants to do, I think there has to be some focus, some direction, and a clear understanding of what the implications are.
Governor also called for some increased spending. $500 million on worker training programs, extending the tax credit, which in effect is spending. What's your sense on that? It's nice, but can it happen?
Well, it's nice, and it's absolutely necessary. I think jobs are the #1 issue that Californians and Americans are grappling with. I've got a task force, for example, here in the 26th, where we're looking at creating another 5,000 jobs from the aerospace, entertainment, small business, community.
Northrop Grumman's leaving.
Yes, and
that's Century City.
It's an additional challenge for us. So anything we can do to encourage jobs, encourage economic development, to encourage entrepreneurship, to encourage small businesses, I'm for it.
Curren Price, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
For Local Edition, I'm Brad Pomerantz. Back to CNN HLN.